All right, gang. Welcome aboard once again for the weekly Mac Forum video chat. We're going to give this another try today and see if we can get things off the ground a little bit better than we did last night. Had a little technical issue with the sound there. Hopefully we've gotten that resolved. Haven't really had a chance to test it extensively, but maybe the gremlins are out of the system. First of all, I want to say welcome to our newest member, Justin R518. Welcome to them and to all of our new members. Hope that you enjoy your time here in the forum and find a lot of useful information. So let's get right into things and see what I dug up yesterday and over the weekend for you. First of all, I want to take a look. This comes as a result of some experiences from member Nighthawk 4. This is an older thread that we just kind of tagged onto, and it has to do with when you're trying to install Windows 10 under Boot Camp. One of the issues that you may run into is trying to decide whether you should use a USB stick that contains the ISO of Windows, or whether you would need to use a digital hard copy, say CD or DVD. Now, here's the good general rule to keep things going, to simplify things. First of all, I do recommend that if you're going to do a boot camp partition, you print out or have access to the boot camp utility documentation. The information that's there covers a lot of things, but one of the things that maybe needs to be cleaned up a little bit. If you have a Mac that originally had a hard drive, a CD drive, an optical drive, then as a general rule, you're going to have an easier time if you still have that optical drive in there and can install Windows that way. It is possible. I've seen some directions on the internet that allow you to use the ISO method with a machine that has that originally had a DVD drive, but sometimes that can be a real pain in the keister to get working. So one of the things that's going to affect how easily you'll be able to get things going is whether or not you've had this drive and this hard copy, this digital drive installed before. As a general rule, you want to use that method if you originally had a CD drive. And I realize that sometimes that's just not possible, but that can resolve a lot of issues here. All right. Next, I want to move right into a couple of things. This first one comes from member Mike from Mesa. Mike is planning to pass his computer on to a family member, and he discovered that when you're wiping the drive and you're starting over from scratch, it is not necessary to install each succeeding version of the OS after a clean install. You can skip the intermediate versions. So let's just say that, for example, if you do an internet install, it's going to install whatever was originally on the machine. Let's just, for the sake of argument, say Maverick. All right. Some people are under the impression that in order to take that machine up to Sierra, you would have to jump through all the other incarnations, go through it, El Capitan, etc., etc. You don't have to do that. First of all, if you can get to the App Store to download it, you could download the latest OS, assuming that your machine supports it. But even if you couldn't, let's just say that you've done a clean install and you've got Maverick or Yosemite, something like that on the machine, and you decide, I want to put Sierra on there. You don't have to go through each succeeding generation. You can go right to Sierra, assuming that your machine supports it. That can save you a good deal of time. That's not always as clear as it could be. And yet again, member Mike from Mesa here one more time. He's been very busy this week, and he was wondering why TextEdit seems to have changed its behavior. And it is to say that sometimes it opens in a documents folder as opposed to opening in an actual TextEdit editable document. As you can see in this screenshot from member Rad Dave, TextEdit used to open in a document, an editable document. You're ready to go. And Mike wanted to know why sometimes TextEdit seems to open in the documents folder as opposed to an editable document. And this seems to, I'm going to scroll down to the end here, and in Mike's mentions here, apparently he had to make a call to Apple to get this worked out. Apparently it involves how you have iCloud Drive settings set up. So if you're working with iCloud Drive, that may be the solution. Experiment with the settings a little bit until you get TextEdit to behave the way you want. And so that one's a difficult one for me to test because I'm not really making use of iCloud Drive at the moment. But that seems to be the heading, that the way that drive is going, the way that thread is going. All right, that gives you a good idea. Some of the things that are going on in the forum. There are a number of other threads, new threads that are popping up today. So check in regularly, and we'll see. I guarantee you'll find some things that are interesting to you. All right, next. This next story comes to us from the Fox News Tech page, and specifically the Kim Commando show. And this story has to do with 3 router tweaks to speed up Wi-Fi. Slow Wi-Fi these days is the death knell for a lot of people. With streaming services and everything being widely used, slow Wi-Fi seems to be a big point of frustration. And here are some things that you can check. Check the bands on your router. Obviously, older routers may only support G speed, but routers made for the last several years will do a mixture of multiple bands. Some of them have the N speed or even AC. And what you're seeing now is 2 different spectrums, 2.4 gigahertz band and a 5 gigahertz band. If your router supports it, put your slower devices, if you've got some 802.11g devices around, put them on that 2.4 gigahertz band if you can. Put your faster speed, your in-speed devices on the 5 gigahertz band. That will affect your speed. Although keep in mind, one of the problems with that older 2.4 gigahertz band is it's shared by a lot of devices, and sometimes you can get some interference from that. So that leads to the second tip. Check the channel that your router is using. If there are other networks nearby, there may be a conflict there where the channels are just too close together and there's some bleed over. Let me just give you an idea. In the apartment where I lived previously, at any given time I could click on my little airport indicator in the menu bar right here, and I could see 7 or 8 networks. And on one particular day, I think 4 of them were unsecured with no password at all. So if you see, you can look here, all of the networks nearby have passwords attached to them. So I accidentally one day, I fired up the old iMac, or iBook rather, let's put it that way, and I was wondering why my speed was incredibly slow. After about 5 minutes, I decided to check it, and the iBook had latched onto neighbor's Wi-Fi network instead of latching on to my own. Once I made the switch and got back on the right network, the speed picked up. So you'll want to check that. You want to make sure you got enough distance between those channels so that things are not overlapping with each other. And then the third one is to secure your network. This is going to, how you do this is going to vary a bit from router to router. But one of the things that you'll need to do is go in and make sure that you have a good, strong password on your Wi-Fi. And the reason for that is this: if you have a weak password and somebody manages to get a hold of that password or figure it out and latch onto your network and basically leech bandwidth for any length of time, you're losing some bandwidth, which means you're going to lose speed as more and more of your own devices join to the network. And I want to make sure that you remember, generally there are two passwords involved here. One is the password to access the router itself, and that's to keep somebody from making unwanted changes to the router settings. And then the other one is the password that you use to protect your network. That would be the password that your devices use to say, hey, here I am, I'm allowed to be on this network, let me in. And also you want to make sure that you're using newer security methods. We've had a couple of posts come up recently where it's possible that the Mac involved may have been set up to use WEP encryption, which is an older method of encryption, not nearly as secure as some of the things that are out now. Most newer routers support WPA or WPA2, and it's even gotten to the point where some of the newer routers don't even support WEP encryption. So if you've got an older machine and it's set to WEP encryption and it's trying to join a network that doesn't support it, then you're going to have a problem usually in making that connection. So I have that there for you. The links, there are a number of links in there that might be helpful to you. The language in the article is fine. If you're a non-techie, non-network guru kind of person, this might be a good article to take a look at. All right, let's move on and see what else we have here. Oh boy, my all-time favorite. This is from the Cult of Mac website, Killian Bell. I haven't had anything from them in a couple weeks, but here is one that discusses the idea of a new piece of malware that spreads via Microsoft Word macros. And for those of you that are not familiar with it, Word macros are actual code that can be executed. And one of the positives, if you look at it that way, is that if you build something in a Word macro language, when the macro executes, those steps are done automatically. Now, to a certain extent, there's some cross-compatibility from one platform to another. You can build, a lot of times you can build most of the code on the Mac and then go over to the PC and have it run. You may have to make some changes, but that also opens up the prospect for malware to spread via these macros. And this is what this particular set of macros does. All right. Let's assume that you have an infected file that contains one of these macros that contain malware. In this case, the malware is buried inside a document that's called U.S. Allies and Rivals Digest Trump's Victory, and it purports to be a Carnegie Endowment for the International Peace article. And when you open the document, it does the following. The code that's in the macro does the following. It checks to see if little snitch is running, and then, assuming little snitch is not running, so that you don't get any warning, it downloads and decrypts its payload. And then step 3, the payload goes active, and the virus/malware is executed. And I use those terms interchangeably in this case, although I don't normally do that because I know that for many of you the two are synonymous. And in this case, the payload that was available to it is no longer being served, so researchers don't know exactly what the payload might have actually done, but this same open source framework that was used has in the past been used, has a number of capabilities, like the ability to monitor webcams, take encrypted keys from keychain, and more. And I want to mention a couple of things with relation to Microsoft Word macro viruses. We saw a lot of this in the Mac OS 8 days. You would see, I think it was either in 7 or 8, there used to be a program called Disinfectant. It was a shareware program that scanned for malware. And eventually they quit developing that program because of the problems trying to keep up with the number of Microsoft Word macro viruses that were spreading among PC files. And because those macros could execute on the Mac side, sometimes they cause problems depending on what code was available. Usually it didn't. Somebody flagged it. I want to show you now. I don't consider Little Snitch to be a good way to approach this. Nothing against the program. Don't get up tomorrow morning and go on Twitter and say that I insulted the developers of Little Snitch. No. I used Little Snitch for a while on my own machine several years ago. The one problem that I had with it is that it was sometimes very difficult to tell whether the process, when it warned you about a process wanting access to your network, sometimes it was difficult to tell whether that process was something that should have been allowed to have access to your network, or whether it was something more, shall we say, nefarious. So I think for most users, that level of involvement is not going to be a really good way to approach this. One thing that I like to do, and I've had this like this even before these problems came up. I want to show you something that you can do in Word to cut down on some of the problems with these macros. First of all, this is from Office 2011, but there's a similar setting in earlier versions of Microsoft Office. You want to launch Word, you're going to go to Preferences, as I just did, and then you're going to go down here, and I'm going to back up here a little bit, and what I want to do is get to Security right here, this little padlock type icon. I'm going to click there. That opens up another preference pane, and I want to make sure that this last item right here, warn before executing a file that contains macros. In other words, it puts up a warning before it executes any macros. I want that turned on so that if a macro tries to execute, I'll know about it and I can make my own judgments as to, okay, I trust where this came from, I don't trust where this came from. You can do that. That's a good starting point. My personal thing right now, and not just for this, but for other things, I don't run macros that I didn't create. I just don't. And to be honest with you, it's been a number of years since I ran macros consistently. When I did, they were in Excel. And I want to say, this talks about Word. Excel also has the capability to run macros. you probably want to go into Excel's preferences and make those same changes so that you get some warning if a macro is about to execute. All right. And then now, another one of my faves, I'm going to have to launch this because I didn't have it up and running. Kirk McLaren over at the Kirkville site. You know him as Kirk the iTunes guy, much like I do. And at his Kirkville site, he has a little blurb or two about using iTunes with network devices and what needs to happen if the network device that contains your iTunes library is not available to you. And as he points out, iTunes has improved a little bit on what happens. In the old days, when people first started putting their music library on external hard drives or on NAS devices, what would happen is if you accidentally launched iTunes before the library volume was available, a bunch of little exclamation points would appear next to the names of various tracks. And that would be your indication that iTunes could not find your media. Okay, now in the modern incarnation of iTunes, it does something different. Let me show you what happens now with the current version of iTunes, and for the last several versions. Here's what happens. Now, I've already taken my media volume offline. In other words, it's not connected at the moment. My iTunes normally would look on an external hard drive for my content. It can't find that right now because that drive is it's attached to my Mac, but as far as I had it ejected, so as far as the computer's concerned, it's not there. Now watch what happens. I'm going to launch iTunes, and as you can see, it should come up here in just a second. There it is. Now I'm going to go, the place to look to see which folder it's looking for is go to Preferences and go to Advanced, and right here, where it should be pointing to my external drive, guess what's happening? It's pointing to an iTunes media folder that's on my main hard drive. That is not where my media content is. So what happens right now is it's realized that the media drive is not there, and it's shifted to an internal folder on my hard drive inside my user profile. Now watch what happens. I'm going to try to pick a song here that I know isn't in that internal drive. I'm just going to go, let's just go for Bad Company here, just for the heck of it. Watch what happens. This is a link to a track called Burning Sky. Some of you may remember that one. When you click, because iTunes can't find it, it gives you the option to locate it or cancel. Now, why do you care, other than the fact that it's kind of a pain to have to try to locate these tracks? Here's the other thing that happens. Let's assume I accidentally launch iTunes without having my media drive connected. And this could also happen if you're having network issues and your network drive isn't available. Not only will iTunes shift and go to the iTunes folder that's in my user profile, here's the other thing it does. If I accidentally import some new tracks, those tracks are going to go into that folder. So Kirk has a link on his site to a script, an Apple script, that's part of Doug Adams' Apple Scripts for iTunes site. And what this script does is check your to make sure that your media drive, wherever that may be, external drive or NAS device, is available before iTunes is launched. That's a great idea. I had a similar script a while back that I was running. This seems to do a little more error checking than I was able to do. My scripting knowledge leaves a lot to be desired. But basically, it would check to make sure that that drive was available and warn you so that you knew where things were going. That's a great idea. And if you run iTunes with your media on a network drive, this is probably a script that you want to take a look at and see if it meets your needs. I'll have a link to the Kirkville article in the show notes, and that should get you going in the right direction. All right, so that hopefully that will help some of you with some of the iTunes issues. As I say, they've done a good job, or a better job, cleaning that procedure up from what it used to be. And if I were to go back in and mount my media drive now, I just quit iTunes. If I were to go back in and mount my media drive now and then relaunch, iTunes would realize it and go back to the right drive. That's something that used to be a bigger hurdle to overcome as well. Hopefully you'll find that little tidbit useful. And then last but not least, I want to squeeze a couple more things in here real quick. First of all, since we're on tips and tricks and security and a few other things tonight, this is an article, as you can see, from Apple Insider about a new piece of malware from Iran that targets the defense industry, human rights advocates, etc., with fake flash updates. Okay, I can't stress this to you guys enough. Okay, I'm one of these people that I understand flash is going to be around for a little while longer. There are a lot of people that would like to see it go away completely in favor of HTML5 or something else. I understand that's not going to happen for a while. But here's one of the things I'm going to tell you. My personal opinion, don't install Flash from anywhere other than the Adobe site unless you are dead certain sure with metaphysical certitude that you are on the Adobe site. Don't do these Flash installers that just pop up in your browser. They are, in many cases, not legit installations of Flash and carry other malware and God knows what else in the payload. So don't do this. If you must install an update to Flash, which we all do from time to time, because I have a few sites that just don't run well if I don't have Flash installed. Some of them don't run at all because they don't have an HTML5 alternative. Go ahead and check out, and when you are about to install something, ask yourself the question, am I dead certain sure that I am dealing with the Adobe website? In fact, I won't even do the click on a link to take me to the Adobe website. I will just manually go to the Adobe's website, poke around until I find Flash. It's relatively easy to find on their site. Doesn't take very long, and go at it that way. And I try to do as few Flash updates as possible. There are some updates that I will do almost the day they're released. Flash is not one of them. I'm normally a fairly adventurous kind of person when it comes to computing, but Flash is one of those things that I generally don't update the first day that it becomes available. It's just not that critical to me to have the absolute latest version of Flash. And so this gives you a little bit more information about that particular piece of malware, what it does, and that's all the time we're going to spend on that. I want to show you one other thing that I kind of jammed in last night when I did a trial run of this show. I'm on Sierra version 10.12.5, I believe it is. And one of the things that has been added to Sierra is, let me go ahead and get open. If you go into your display preferences and go to displays, go to system preferences, displays, and you will see right here a tab. You may or may not have this arrangement tab depending on whether you have a second monitor attached. But what you will see is a tab called Nightshift. And some of you may be familiar with it because Nightshift's been available on iOS devices since iOS 10. What Nightshift does is make use of some research that's been available for a few years. Is it says that one of the things that may be keeping some people from getting really good night's sleep is because of the fact that we're all on our devices until right before we go to bed, and these have colors that are more in the bright and bluish spectrum, and that if we would shift to quote-unquote warmer colors before going to bed, it might allow us to get to sleep faster and sleep a little deeper. So I have Night Shift turned on my phone. If you don't have an iPhone yet and you want to see what Night Shift looks like, let's take a look at that preference. All right, the first one, as you can see right here, you can schedule when it occurs. Okay? And you can either set a specific time, a custom time, or set it for sunset to sunrise. Now, as you can see, I've got it off right now. Let me show you what happens when you turn on Night Shift. I'm gonna change here, and I could set up a custom timer. You can see what that screen looks like, starting at a certain time and stopping at a different time. But let's just use the sunrise to sunset mode, and I'll show you what happens. Now, it's already past sunset here in the studio, so let's take a look at what happens. Notice the overall color of the screen. I just activated, and you see how it got a little bit more of a kind of a yellowish cast to it. That's what happens. I can adjust this a little bit as I get warmer. Okay. If it goes this way, it gets less warm. That's back to that brighter blue that it was originally. All right. As I move this way, it gets warmer. As you can see, the colors tend to shift a little more toward the orange and red. Now, obviously, this is not a setting that you would want to have invoked if you are doing color critical work, because it's going to put this cast on it. You're gonna see it with a cast, and you're going to think that it's not done correctly when it might be. But that'll give you an idea. For some things, you might like it. As I say, on my computer, I have it turned off. On my phone, I have it turned on so that when I wake up in the middle of the night, look to see what time it is, it's not quite as jarring to me as other things might be. So that's just an extra little tidbit that I threw in at the last minute. Hopefully you found that and all the information for this evening very good, and I hope that you enjoyed it. That's going to just about do it for this week's tips and tricks and the rest of the forum roundup. This has been your host, Sylvester Rock, aka Sly Dude in the forum. I'll be happy to talk to you about the show during the week if you've got an idea or some tip that you might think we need to spend some time talking about it. Put a comment in the show thread. I'll have tonight's show notes up shortly, assuming nothing goes wrong. And thank you for joining me. And until next week, I'll see you in the forum, guys.